Hello everyone, so just recently I did the review of the Chuwi GT Box mini PC, and in this one I was showing how well macOS runs on this little mini PC. And in this tutorial I want to show you how you can install macOS on your unit. So what you need for this is of course the Chuwi GT Box. You need one USB stick with at least 8 GB of storage. Better is if you have 2 USB sticks handy. Then if you are using Windows to create the install stick, you also need a Ethernet connection to install macOS. If you already own a Mac or a Hackintosh, you don't need an Ethernet connection for installation because we can create a full install stick under macOS. So yeah, you also need a package I created with all the configuration files needed to get macOS running on this machine. This one is linked down below in the video description, so please download that and you will be ready to go. So the first part of this tutorial is for those of you who only have access to a Windows PC. And as you can see, I've now downloaded the installation package for the Chuwi GT Box onto this Windows installation. I right click on it to extract this zip file, and then I will get a folder with a couple of subfolders and files. So next we are entering this folder, and then you will see the Chuwi GT Box configuration folder, and in this one you will find a tools folder and a Clover config folder. First you go into tools folder and then you double click on install, and here we'll see a couple of text files, and what we need to download here is the install stick creator for Windows. Double click on this text file, you will find the download link in there. I decided to put the download link in there so you always have access to the latest version. So just paste the URL into your browser and download this boot disk utility, save it. Let's unzip this, it's called BDU. So there we go, we can delete the zip file again, then enter the folder and here we'll find the BD utility application. Just double click on it. It will ask you if you want to give this app access. Yes, we want to do that. So now I have plugged the USB stick. I want to create an installation stick with into my computer, and you see it appeared here in this window. So the first thing we want to do is to format it. Just highlight the USB stick and click on format. Click OK and wait until the process has finished. And now formatting has finished, it says all done here, and we can now expand the stick and we see that 2 partitions have been created on it, one larger no-name partition and one 200 MB Clover partition. So next we click on the DL Center button, and here you want to click on the update button to gather a list from the latest macOS recovery versions from the Apple servers. This will take a short while. So once the list has been created, you will get a filled drop-down menu here, and here you want to click on the macOS Mojave recovery. We can also install macOS Catalina Beta, but since this isn't a final release yet, we will go with the Mojave version. And once you selected this, just click the DL button and the recovery image will be downloaded from the Apple servers. So once this is finished, you will get this summary information. Just click on OK. Now again, expand your USB stick and click on the larger partition, on the no-name partition here. Then you click on the restore button, and here you select the image that has been downloaded right now. In this case, it's named 4.hfs. Click on open and then select yes, and then it will transfer the recovery image onto your USB stick. So now the recovery stick has been created successfully and we can close the boot disk utility. Then we go back into my folder with the Clover configuration and double click on the Clover config. Here we'll find a couple of folders and a config.plist file. Just highlight all of them, right click and click on copy, and then you go to your PC and select the Clover partition on your USB stick. Here you enter the EFI folder, then you enter the Clover folder, and then you will just paste all of the stuff inside of here. And if it asks you to overwrite files, you of course click on a yes to all. Replace all files in the target drive. And now you see we have a couple of folders that already existed in here and we don't need them. So we can delete the drivers 32 UEFI, we can delete the drivers 64, and we can delete the drivers of folders. So let's just do this. And what we also can do is to delete some drivers in the driver 64 UEFI folder which are not necessary. This is the audio DXE-64.EFI, also the data hub DXE-64.EFI, the FS inject, and the OSX Aptio-Fix driver. Those are not necessary. Those are created by the boot disk utility in here, and Windows doesn't replace them with the folder. They just merge them. So you can delete those files if they are in here. Just click on delete and permanently delete them. What we can also delete is the system product name folder in the OEM thing. This is just a sample config and not necessary. So once all of this is done, we have a pretty clean looking structure in here, and basically our install stick is created and ready to install. So now I'm going to show you how to create the install stick on macOS, so on a real Mac or an existing Hackintosh. And here you again download the config zip file linked in the video description. You unzip it, enter the folder, and then you go to Tools, Install. And here you open up the install stick creator for macOS file and the Clover Bootloader file, because we need to download these two things. First is the Tino installer, which transfers a macOS installation image onto a USB stick with a graphical user interface. So I just paste the URL into my browser. You will find the latest release. Just click on the Tino zip file and then it will download this. And we will do the same thing for the Clover Bootloader, because Tino doesn't automatically install the Clover Bootloader onto the stick. We need to do this manually here. So just open up the URL, click on download, wait until the countdown is finished and the file will download. So there we go, now we have downloaded both of the files. And next we need to go into the App Store, and here you search for macOS Mojave or whatever version of macOS you wanna install. Here you will find the macOS Mojave, then click on download, and this will open up the system settings with the updater. And since I already downloaded this, it already opened up, and we don't want to run the macOS installer now, so we just quit the installation. What you want to do next is to go to the folder you downloaded the files to and unzip the Clover Bootloader and the Tino installer. So we can now delete those leftover zip files. And then we open up the Tino installer, click on open, and then we click on create a bootable macOS installer. We click on proceed. We agree to the license agreement, and then we select our USB stick that we have plugged into our Mac. In my case, it's this no-name stick here. I click on next. Then I select my macOS installation app, which is this one, install macOS Mojave.app. Click on next. Click on yes, I understand, and then it will start transferring the files onto the stick. It will ask for your password one time. Just enter it, click on or press the enter button, and then wait until this stick is created. So now our installation stick has been created and we can quit the Tino installer. Next we enter the Clover folder, which we downloaded and extracted previously. Double click on the installation package, click on continue, again on continue, and again on continue. Then switch the installation place to the USB stick we just created and click on continue, then click on change. Here you hit the checkbox for the installation on UEFI motherboards, and you uncheck the UEFI drivers checkbox here. Then you click on install, enter your admin password, and Clover will install onto the USB stick. So now installation has finished and we can close this, and no, we don't delete it yet. And now as you can see, we have the Efi partition of the stick mounted. So double click on this, enter the Efi folder and enter the Clover folder. And here we'll find a driver 64 folder, which we can delete because we don't need this. Next, you go back into my installation package for the Chuwi GT Box. Here you enter the Clover config folder, and then you just copy all of that stuff and paste it into the Efi partition of the stick. And of course, we will overwrite all of the files in here. So just click on replace. What you can do as well is to delete the system product name folder inside the OEM folder, because this is just a sample config that we don't need. And then we have the installation stick finished. And what you do then is to plug a second USB stick into your Mac or PC. This applies to both the installation stick created on Windows and macOS. And on this stick you place for once your Clover installer, because we will need this later on. And then you also place these tools, these administration tools on it, Clover Configurator and Text Updater. Once you did this, we can start with the installation process. So now I have plugged the installation stick into the Chuwi GT Box, and what you want to do next is to turn it on and then repeatedly hit the delete key on your keyboard until you see the BIOS settings screen of this thing. So there we go. And now we have to go to the boot tab, and here we go down to boot option priorities, and here we switch the first entry to our USB stick, which in my case is the SanDisk stick, and I disable the remaining entries so that it looks like this. Next you go to save and exit, and then you hit save changes and reset, click on yes, and then it will boot from the USB installation stick. And since I already had macOS installed on this Chuwi GT Box, you already see an option for booting this here, but we want to boot from the installation stick, which is this USB icon, boot macOS install from install macOS Mojave. Just highlight this entry and hit the enter button, and then it will start booting the installer. And just a quick note, in case you see a kernel panic during boot up, just kill the mini PC by pressing the power button for a couple of seconds. Boot it up again. In the Clover boot screen, hit the F11 key, then it will reboot again, and then you again try to boot to the installer, and then it should work. If this happens, just repeat this step and it should usually work then. So after a couple of minutes, the installer will be booted up, and this might be set to German because in my configuration file I set German to the system language. You can change this by clicking on this button up here in the menu bar and click on change language, and here you can switch to English, which I will do right away. So you can see what I am doing and understand it. Then you confirm your language selection with this arrow on the bottom here. This will take a short while until the setting is applied. So there we go. Now we have the English language. Then you click on the disk utility because we need to format our SSD. We are going to install macOS on. Here you click on the View button and select Show All Devices. And this is the internal SSD of the Chuwi GT Box on which I will install macOS. If you have a second SSD built in to install macOS on, you're of course going to select this. So I'm going to select the SSD, click on Erase. Here I make sure that we have selected the GUID partition map. Then we want to format it as APFS, and we give the name Hackintosh SSD. You can of course give a different name if you want. Then click on Erase, and our new system partition will be created. So once this is finished, simply click on Done, close the disk utility, then highlight Install macOS and click on Continue. Then the macOS installer will load up. This can take a short while. And since I am using the installation stick created on macOS right now, all the files already are on the stick and I don't need to download anything from the internet. If you are using the installation stick created in Windows, you need to plug in the Ethernet cable into your mini PC, otherwise it won't be able to install because it needs to download the macOS files from the internet. So once we are ready, we can click on continue, then we click on agree, again on agree. Then I select the partition we just created, then I click on install and the first installation step will start, followed by a reboot. And now our first reboot happened, and as you can see we've got a new boot entry called boot macOS install from Hackintosh SSD, and of course we will click enter on this one and this will bring us right into the second installation step. Now we hit the second stage and it will once again do a reboot, and then once you see the Clover Bootloader again, you simply select the same boot entry as before. So here we go, we select boot macOS install from Hackintosh SSD, this one, not the USB stick, this one on the local SSD. Hit enter. And then it will once again boot up and continue the installation. So now the final installation process is being continued and this will take about 12 minutes as it says here. So now the installation has completed and we are back into the Clover boot screen, and now you see we have the new entry boot macOS from Hackintosh SSD. The install thing is gone, so we can hit enter and boot our macOS installation for the very first time. So now we reached the final setup assistant, and this thing again will be in German, but don't worry about it, you can change the language later on. Basically you just need to follow the steps I am doing here. So you select your region, in my case I select Germany, I click on continue, then I select my keyboard layout, click on continue. Then I select the bottom entry here. My computer isn't connected to the internet, which you should select in any case, no matter if you already have an internet connection via Ethernet or not, because this gets the Apple account set up out of the way, which we can't do right now because we don't have a serial number set. So simply select the last option here and click on continue, then confirm, then again click on continue. No, we don't want to transfer any information now. Click on continue. Then we need to accept the license agreement, which we will of course do. Then I can enter my account information. In this case, it's just my name. The account name will be generated automatically. Then I also need to set a password. And then I can click continue. And in the next step we get the express configuration, which we can do, so just again click on continue. Then we can choose if we want to apply the dark mode or the light mode. I will go for the light mode because it's better for filming off the screen. Click on continue. And then macOS will be set up finally. And shortly we will land on the desktop. So there we go, now we are on the desktop and we have the keyboard assistant open. Just click on continue, press the button highlighted here and then it's done. Now to set the language to your desired language, go to the system settings down here, which is this gear icon. And here we'll find the language and region icon with this flag and the globe on it. Click on this. And then you will have a list of languages here. Just click the plus sign and then you can add English, for example, and then you can use English as your main language, and then do just one reboot and your system language will be changed. So as you can see, after a reboot my system language is now changed to English, so this is rather simple and the German shouldn't get in your way. So the next thing we need to do is to make sure our mini PC can boot without the installation stick, which isn't the case right now because macOS doesn't come with a bootloader. So to do this, you simply hook up the second USB stick we created. And once you got this one plugged in, it will appear on the desktop. Open it up, and then copy the administration tools from my installation package over to your local drive. I will put it to downloads, and then also copy the Clover installer over to downloads. And then we are going to unzip those two zip files. And then drag these two applications to your applications folder. And now we will run the Clover installer to install the bootloader onto our system drive that we installed macOS on. Simply click on continue, again on continue, again on continue. Check if the install location matches, which is Hackintosh SSD of course. Then click on customize, check Clover for UEFI booting only. Uncheck the UEFI drivers thingy here, and then click on install, enter your password you set, and Clover will be installed. Next, you notice we have our Efi Partition mounted that we installed Clover on. So let's just open this one. And then we go back into our installation package. And here we go again to Clover config. And now we open up the EFI folder on our system, Efi Partition, go into the Clover folder. As with the install stick, we delete the driver64 folder. We don't need this. We can also delete again the system product name inside the OEM folder. And then we simply select all the files out of the installation package, copy 10 items, and then we overwrite all the files in our system EFI drive. Click apply to all and replace. And now we can boot without the stick. Now just one quick thing. You can also do this before the installation. Open up Clover Configurator. You need to confirm this in the security settings first if you are opening it for the very first time, because this application isn't signed by Apple. So there we go, this is Clover Configurator, and this is an editor for the Clover configuration file, the config.plist. And if you open this up with the Clover Configurator and go to the GUI tab, you will here see the language selector, which is set to DE. If you set this to EN, the language will by default be set to the English language. So this can come handy in case you are annoyed by the German installer language. So just in case you don't want to use German, just change this option here. You can either do this graphically, or you can also open this config.plist with any text editor. So let me just show you that. Text edit. Here we have the macOS text editor. So this is just kind of a normal XML file, and you will find the string here as well. Let me just scroll down a bit. Here you will find where we have it. GUI. There we go. Key GUI, and inside of here you will find the language string here, and you can change this using a text editor to whatever you like. By default it will be DE O, and now it's changed to ENO for English. So that's about that. So now let's check if the mini PC can boot without our installation stick. To do this, we simply eject our installation stick. And I'm also going to eject our second stick. So let me just unplug the drives. 1, 2, there we go. And now I'm going to reboot the mini PC once again, and the UEFI BIOS should immediately recognize that our boot stick rebooted from all the time now is gone, and it should automatically switch back to the internal SSD. So let's see if this works. There we go, reboot, and boom, now we are booting from the internal SSD. And now we of course again select boot macOS from Hackintosh SSD, and the system will boot up as normal. The next step we have to do now is to get an internet connection. So if you are hooking up your mini PC via Ethernet, just plug in the cable and you will have internet. If you want to access the internet via Wi-Fi, you can't do this using the internal Wi-Fi of the Chuwi GT Box, because this is an Intel Wi-Fi module and those are not supported by macOS. But there are alternatives. There are USB Wi-Fi sticks that are compatible with macOS. I own this one. It's an AC 1200M Wi-Fi stick from China. This thing cost me like 10 bucks or something. It has a really good reception quality, is really fast and works great with macOS. Also don't has any sleep issues or something like that. So I will now plug this thing in, install the driver, and then I will be back. So now I have installed the driver for this Wi-Fi stick, and as you can see we have an icon up here and we see Wi-Fi networks. Let me just connect to my router. So connection is now successfully established. Let's just quickly test if it works by running a speed test. As you can see, internet is working now. Let me just run it. I have a 200 Mbit internet connection, so we should reach around that. And yep, we do. So everything is working just fine here, and we now have internet connection. So the next thing we need to do is to set up our serial number so we can finally connect to our Apple account /Apple ID /iCloud, which isn't possible until now. So what you want to do is to click on Mount EFI inside the Clover Configurator. Here you mount your system SSD that you installed macOS on. Just click on Mount, enter your password, and then it will be mounted. And then you can open up the config.plist using the Clover Configurator. And now we switch to the SM BIOS tab here, and here we'll find two fields: fill this at serial number and fill this at SMUUID. And to generate a serial number, just click on Generate New to generate a SMUUID. Also click on Generate New. And now the important step, we need to check if the serial number we just generated already exists, because if it does, this can lead to our Apple ID being suspended. So this is dangerous. You need to check this always. So to check this, simply click on the Check Coverage button here, and it will automatically transfer the generated serial number to the Apple support website. And now we need to enter the captcha code, and we can check if the serial number exists, and yep, it does. So that's bad, we can't use this serial number. Let's generate a new one, and we check coverage once again. Again, I need to enter the captcha code. And this time it says, "We are sorry, but the serial number isn't valid. Please check your information and try again." And this is what we want to see. The serial number doesn't exist, so we can use it for this Hackintosh. And please don't use the serial number you see here now. Generate your own, because if you use this one, it is very likely that you will lose your Apple ID, and that includes all your iCloud files, all your contacts, all your calendar information, and of course also all your purchases. So this is dangerous. Don't do shit with stuff like this. So after we generated a valid serial number that isn't used by anyone yet, we can save the configuration via File Save, and then we can reboot the mini PC and we can set up our Apple ID. What you also can do now is to switch to the Boot tab here and delete the -v boot argument here using the minus button. This will cause the Apple logo to appear during boot instead of the text boot. But I actually recommend leaving the text boot enabled, because this can be very useful if there are some issues. So I will leave it here and will just do a reboot. So after this reboot, if you open up About This Mac in the Apple menu, you will see that we have our new serial number applied here. And this means we can now sign in with our Apple ID, which is done by opening the System Preferences, then click on iCloud, and then you can enter your account information. And after this, you will be able to use all of the Apple services, including the App Store. Now, when running a Hackintosh, I think it's important to know what's going on in the background here so you can troubleshoot on your own just in case you have any issues. And this is why I want to do a quick explanation of what components and parts this Chuwi GT Box Hackintosh consists. So, Clover is our bootloader and it is necessary to boot macOS. Without Clover, you can't boot macOS on PC hardware. Clover kind of translates between the PC hardware and the macOS and also provides a lot of fixes needed to run macOS on PC hardware. The most important thing is that PCs and Macs both use the ACPI standard for like getting information about the hardware present, especially on the motherboard. But they differ in some parts. And if we have a look in the Clover configuration file, you will see that we have a couple of ACPI patches in here, and those, for example, are device renames, what you see here. So for example, on a PC, the iGPU device, so the graphics chip that is integrated into the CPU, is called GFX0, but on Macs it's called iGPU. So we need to rename this in order for it to work, and Clover can do this stuff on the fly with those hex values. So this is simply the hex value for GFX0 that it looks for, and then it replaces it with the hex value of iGPU that it also looks for. And this applies to several other devices. This here is the Intel Management Engine interface. This is our SATA controller for the SSD. This is our LPC device. And we also have a couple of more renames. This here is for HDMI audio. So yeah, that's about it here. Then we also have a couple of generic patches. This Fix SBus patch, for example, causes the Apple System Management Bus driver to load on this mini PC, which it otherwise wouldn't. Then we have a couple of generic audio patches that we apply here. And we also have a delete unused patch, which deletes devices from the ACPI tables that are not used by macOS, and thus eliminates a couple of errors, which however is mostly cosmetic. And then another important checkbox here is the plugin type, along with the plugin type dropdown, which is set to 1. This causes the Apple x86 platform plugin to load, which is the power management driver for the Intel platform on macOS. And if this isn't loaded, the power management won't work properly. So these options cause it to load. And that's about it already in the ACPI section. Then we have the boot section where we can set boot arcs for macOS. -V causes the text boot to be activated. This one tells the OS that it shouldn't reboot if a kernel panic occurs, so you can see what's going on. Dark wake is responsible for how macOS wakes up from sleep. There are different values that cause different behavior. If this is the wrong value, waking up from sleep can take a long time, or you might need to press a button 2 times in order for it to wake up. For this mini PC, Dark Wake 8 is the correct value. Then we have a couple of Clover specific options. Last booted volume tells Clover to always boot from the last selected boot volume. So if you booted macOS, it will pre-select macOS. If you booted Windows, just in case you do dual boot on this one, it will pre-select Windows. You can also provide with your system drive name you want to boot by default here. You can also set a timeout in case you want to do automatic booting without hitting any key, and this XMP detection field here is responsible for RAM detection. This basically reads out the XMP profiles from the RAM, and this can cause macOS to display the correct information in case it doesn't out of the box. Then we have the boot graphics tab, in which we don't need to set anything. Same applies to the CPU. All of this stuff is recognized automatically these days. Then we have the devices tab where we can provide with fake device IDs, which we don't need in this case. We have a USB section in which we can inject our USB device and provide a fix for high current on the USB ports. We can also provide our devices in the mini PC with some additional device properties. In this case, we're providing the HDMI audio device with some properties, as well as the integrated processor graphics. In this case, we are telling the system what type of connectors we have available, and we are also telling the system which platform ID to use for the specific GPU used on here. And those properties are actually used by a driver that we are injecting via Clover, which is called whatevergreen. This is a huge package that's including a lot of graphics fixes for Hackintoshes, and this is using these properties to get all of the stuff right. Then another interesting thing is the audio part here. This is the layout ID for the used Realtek ALC codec inside of here. Depending on the codec your machine uses, there are different IDs available, and you just need to test which one works. In this case, it's the ID 17, and this ID is used for the Apple ALC, which kind of patches the native audio driver of macOS to support more audio chipsets. And well, this Kext uses this layout ID here. So just so you know how this works. At disabled drivers, we don't need to set anything again. GUI is for the Clover bootloader itself. You can change some of the aspects of Clover. I showed you previously the default system language selection. You can also change the boot resolution. So if you use a 1440p monitor, you can just change this here. You can also hide boot volumes that are displayed. You can change the boot drive scanning behavior. You can enable and disable the mouse in the Clover boot screen. So this is all pretty handy. Then we have a graphics tab where we don't need to change anything because we are using whatevergreen and those device properties. So nothing needs to be done by Clover in this area. Then kernel and Kext patches is very interesting. Here you can patch drivers and kernel and the kernel of macOS on the fly during the booting process. However, on this machine this isn't necessary, so we don't need any of this. And we just have two generic options set, the Apple RTC and kernel PM, which are some patches needed by most Hackintoshes. And well, the other stuff is pretty much not interesting as well for you. Please don't change anything in this configuration. This is perfectly fine-tuned. Usually you don't need to change anything. If you do, chances are high that nothing works afterwards. So back to the Kext folder here. All of these Kexts are injected by Clover Bootloader into the system. Kexts are kernel extensions. Those are the drivers for macOS. As I already said, we have whatevergreen, which is responsible for graphics patching, and we have our Apple ALC, which is responsible for extending the native sound driver of macOS with support for more ALC codecs. And then we also have the Lilo Kext, which is a kernel patching API, and actually those two Kexts are based on the Lilo Kext, so they won't work without this. This is mandatory. Then we have a USB port injector specific to the Chuwi GT Box, which tells the system what USB ports we have on the system and what kind of ports they are and their specs. This little Kext is created by me and specific to the Chuwi GT box and works on all of the Chuwi GT boxes. So you can just use it and don't need to care about it. One file that's belonging to this USB port injector is this SSDT-EC fake device. This is an ACPI table which provides the system with a fake EC device. macOS needs an EC device to load the power management driver for USB in order to provide more than just 500 milliamps on those ports. And this causes the macOS USB power management driver to load and then provide plenty of power on the USB ports. Back into our Kext folder, You also see the fake SMC text. This is very important and needed for any Hackintosh. As you might know, a real Macintosh comes with a SMC chipset, the system management controller, which is responsible for fan control, sensor readout, some security stuff. And yeah, so we don't have this SMC inside a real PC. And this means that we need to emulate it in order for macOS to be able to run on the hardware. And this is what fake SMC does. It does the same as the native Apple SMC chipset, and it also provides macOS with sensor readout based on the sensor plugins for fake SMC. This fake SMC CPU sensors provides sensor readout from the processor, and the ACPI sensors text provides with sensor readout from the motherboard sensors, as well as the temperature sensor from the SSD. Then we also have a Realtek RTL8111 text. This is the Ethernet driver. This is a Linux driver port for the specific Ethernet chipset, ported over to macOS by the community. Great job, works just fine. You just drop this in here and it works. And this is my USB Wi-Fi driver, so don't worry if you don't have this in your folder. So that's what we need for running macOS on the Chuwi GT Box. Then there are some additional drivers, but those are not for macOS, but for the BIOS instead, for the UEFI BIOS. Those are placed in driver 64 UEFI. And those basically extend the UEFI BIOS of the Chuwi GT Box with support for APFS booting, HFS booting. We also have a patch to be able to boot macOS because the kernel space, the kernel memory area wouldn't be sufficient or wouldn't be correct to what macOS expects. So this patches this. And we also have a little helper driver for the fake SMC, which is called SMC helper. So all of that stuff is mandatory for the Chuwi GT Box. If we have other stuff inside of here, just delete it. You don't need this on the Chuwi GT Box. So that's about the basic structure of this Clover configuration necessary to run macOS on the Chuwi GT Box. Now I also want to provide you with some knowledge about Hackintosh Administration. So what you should do when running a Hackintosh is to create regular backups, and macOS comes with a great backup utility called Time Machine, which comes really handy for Hackintosh use. So just plug in some external hard drive that you will be able to use for backups all the time, that you don't use for anything else. If you plug it in, Time Machine will immediately ask you if you want to use this as a backup disk. Just select Use as Backup Disk and boom, there you go, your first backup will be created. And if something goes wrong inside the system itself, you can always restore files. You can even reinstall macOS from the Time Machine backup. You just have to reboot into the macOS recovery, and from there we'll be able to restore a backup. You can also reinstall macOS from the recovery itself and restore any backup afterwards. So this comes really handy. And after you created a backup of your machine, you can also always go back in time in any folder that has been backed up. So for example, in the applications folder, if you create regular backups and let's say you deleted some application, if you are missing this application and don't want to just download it again but just restore it, you can just hit the Time Machine and oops, sorry, it was the wrong button. You can just enter Time Machine and you will get this view where you can go back in time and then restore your file or application. So of course I haven't done any backup until now. This is why I can't go back in time right now, but just cancel. But this is how simple it works. Great system. So I recommend that before you are installing a macOS update, which is available in the system settings. Here under software update, here you can install macOS updates if they are available. So before you do that, run a time machine backup to make sure your data is safe. But besides of that, there is another important thing to talk about, and that's keeping Clover and your Kext up to date. And this is why I included the Kext updater. If you open this up, this comes really handy because it enables you to look for updates for all of the Kexts inside our Clover configuration. So let me just grant access for this application. There we go. So this one will ask you for your password. Don't worry about this. Just enter it. And then we'll ask you again one time, and you can also set it to be saved, so you don't always need to enter it. And then you can select check updates here and then click on start. And now it will look for updates for your Kext that you have inside your Clover configuration. As you can see, we have updates for the Apple ALC, we have updates for the Lido Kext, and we have an update for whatever green, and they have been automatically downloaded to the desktop where we find the updated Kexts now. So next we can close the Kext updater, go to our Efi partition on the system SSD, and we can also then replace the updated Kext, the old Kexts with the updated Kexts. So we will be up to date again. So you should always do this before installing a macOS update, because if you install a macOS update and your Kexts are old, it can happen that it doesn't boot anymore. And also Clover Bootloader needs to be up to date, because sometimes macOS updates need some updated bootloader in order to work. But the important thing is, if you update a Kext or the Clover Bootloader, it could potentially happen that your configuration is destroyed or it doesn't work anymore and you can't boot as well. But we can actually back up our Clover configuration as well, which is rather simple. Just go into the main EFI folder here on the system SSD, then copy the boot and the Clover folder. Just copy these two items, then go into the Clover configurator. And just as an example, you can use an USB stick, some external hard drive. We now have the hard drive plugged in that we are backing up Time Machine to right now. So let's just mount the EFI partition of this hard drive and open it up. And as you can see, this EFI partition is totally empty right now because it simply isn't used. So we are creating a new folder called EFI inside of there, so it matches the same structure as on the system SSD. Then we go inside this new folder, and here we paste our two folders copied from the system EFI partition. So now we have the boot and Clover folder on here, and this drive is bootable now. So if something happens after we updated our Kext here, let me just do that. So let me drag the Apple ALC update to there and replace the old Kext. Same with Lilu. And the same with whatever green. You can ignore those files, you just need the Kext. And now we have the new Kexts inside of there, but we also have the old Kexts backed up here. Sorry, wrong folder. I mean here. So this means if those Kexts don't work, or if I installed a Clover update that doesn't work, I have a fallback here on the external hard drive. So I can just go into my BIOS settings, switch to the external hard drive as my boot device. Clover will boot from this external hard drive, and I can boot back into macOS and revert the changes made on the EFI partition of the system SSD. So what you want to do if a macOS update arrives. First, you are looking for updates for the Clover Bootloader and for your Kexts. If those are available, grab your external hard drive and do a backup of your system and do a backup of your currently working Efi partition. Then once this is done, you update your Clover Bootloader and your kext for whatever an update is available. Then you reboot and check if it still works. If it does, you can run your macOS update. If it doesn't, you probably shouldn't do the macOS update and revert the changes using the external hard drive. So that's how simple it is, and it makes Hackintoshing so much more stable and secure and a lot of fun to use in general. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this little dive into the Hackintosh world, and I wish you a lot of fun with your Chuwi GT Box Hackintosh. Bye bye.